as we've been reporting, it's a busy news day today. I want to take you now to Switzerland, Davos. It's the last day of the World Economic Forum. Team South Africa currently addressing the media. Let's listen in.
Can you take us into your confidence about what was discussed in that meeting?
Well, the key issues are of concern. For example, to supply power to South Africa. A number of the business leaders who are invested in South Africa are concerned about the interruptions in power supply. We indicated that the issue is being handled. We pointed out, for example, that new chief executive officer who clearly in the first couple of days he has been there, he has shown that he has got the vision and the interest and energy to lead this corporation. We indicated without any spin that the problems won't be solved immediately, but that they're being attended to. And that as we go forward, we want the problems at solved. But we also indicated that we have developed a multi-pronged energy strategy now in South Africa that involves Eskom, but also renewables and other participants in the generation of electricity in the country, that we should achieve a state of power certainty in the medium to long term. So that was one issue, Eskom. The second one, in my case, was about the fiscal sustainability of the South African budget, and I indicated the steps that we are taking to ensure that we manage the debt, we have responsible spending and investment in infrastructure. With the what you could call the Minister of Finance of Switzerland, and where we recommitted to the ongoing bilateral program that's there between Switzerland and South Africa, and many other such things. The meeting with the informal gathering of world economic leaders is managed under very strict Chatham House rules. Therefore, no matter how smiley you are this morning, how beautiful you are this morning, how friendly you are, I'm unable to tell you what we discussed there.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Minister. The next question.
If I could add, I think that my observation was that South Africa still enjoys a great deal of interest, particularly from business leaders from outside South Africa. In some of the roundtable sessions that we both participated in, a number of the participants were persons who had either just recently visited South Africa or had prior experience of the country. And I think South Africa needs to make much more of tourism than it might be doing, because there's huge interest, great admiration for what it offers to tourists, and a lot of business interest peaks following a visit to the country. This was said by several people to me, and I actually said to Minister Mboweni at one point that we need to increase our investment in tourism communication so that people do understand the message that was being conveyed to us, that your country, in terms of tourism, has a great deal to offer, and it's when we visit that we actually get a sense of what we might do with South Africa. In addition, a number commented about our infrastructure and actually see this as a positive attraction in terms of considering business opportunities. So we must make sure we improve, maintain, and expand and modernize our infrastructure in order to continue to be an attractive destination.
Thank you, Minister. Any member of the panel would like to comment before I take the next question? Thank you very much. The next question, please.
Good morning. I'm Tim Cohen from Business Maverick. I'd like to ask two questions. One's about investment. I read an interesting article in the Financial Times saying, for African countries, Davos offers a lot. It's, great to meet people and listen to what they say. But from an investment, from a collecting investment point of view, it doesn't seem to be working, and that Africa's profile, particularly in this at this particular Davos, was low. I just wondered what your feelings were about that, whether you would agree or not. The second question is really about the theme of this year's WEF has been almost overwhelmingly about the climate crisis. South Africa's energy problems are well known, but it does seem to me, I just wonder whether anybody had asked you about why South Africa had put on hold the IPP process, or was forward with renewables, with any energy, whether that was a subject. And I'd be interested myself, why is the IPP process on hold? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Team Cohen of Business Maverick. Since 1991. Of signing big investment deals, you are at the wrong place. You might stumble across a deal, but if you came here thinking you're going to, you go back home with a bag full of investments, wrong place. At Davos, we exchange ideas, we debate issues, we have conversations, we make friendships, hopefully long-lasting friendships, which might, either in the short, medium, or long term, translate into investment. Davos gives us the opportunity to continue the conversation about our country and to learn from other countries what they're doing. Conversations between and amongst business people, amongst intellectuals, heavy global intellectuals, about the latest thinking on various issues. As I say, if you stumble across an investment opportunity, grab it and run up the Alps with it and go home with it. But don't, if you left South Africa hoping to come and grab investments here, you'll be terribly disappointed. Coming to the issue of the energy policy and mix in South Africa, I think it's our fault as a government that we have not communicated sufficiently the policy positions that we have taken. And the policy positions we have taken are actually quite revolutionary in the sense that we have decided to have a fairly complex mix of the energy system in South Africa, including owner-generated power, which is a huge, huge development in South Africa. And then including renewables, including, of course, traditional ESCOM issues, and I'm sure you've heard the Minister of Minerals and Energy say we need to seriously begin even to think about nuclear, very seriously, in an open, transparent way, because the energy needs for South Africa are big, and particularly given the fact that the energy needs for South Africa are actually the Southern African energy needs because of the interrelationship of the Southern African political economy and the role of, say, ESCOM, for example, in the Southern African energy mix. So, very important in that respect. And but let's be positive as we leave Davos.
Can I add something?
I think it's important to state that the IPP was published by government at the end of November. Not the IPP, rather the Integrated Resource Plan, the IRP. And included in that is the next phase of the IPP. And we've already made several statements through Minister Mantashe on this. And I think it was covered in the Daily Maverick, actually. So I'm a bit surprised. Nevertheless, On the climate theme, all of us agreed that there is a need for urgent action, and the Secretary General of the United Nations did emphasize that at COP26 we do hope to see concrete measures agreed which will advance us to the phase that begins the process of reducing the increased high temperatures throughout the world. But we as governments have to take the necessary steps and actions. So I think it was important that WEF weaved in very, very clearly a focus on climate change, and given the number of global leaders present here, it was a vital platform given the leadership of the UK in preparation for COP26. We had much more discussion about likely deals at the UK-Africa Summit in London just a few days before the Davos meeting. And that was where UK business leaders were present, as were various investment ministers, trade ministers, finance ministers from African countries. And I think at that meeting, a number of future engagements were agreed and would probably lead to increased trade.
Thank you.
World Economic Forums where President Ramaphosa was here, obviously Ramaphosa, lots of excitement and people wanting to meet the president and so on. So there was, a lot of hype in the previous 2 years. I think this year, with a lower profile for the country, I think we've really got down to brass tacks. So the bilateral meetings that I've had, and comparing notes with Minister Patel yesterday afternoon that he's had, have been business-like meetings dealing with what are the real issues for particular companies as they do business in South Africa. They obviously raise issues with us, and I think they've been very productive. The great benefit of Davos is that typically you're dealing with multinational CEOs, not the regional people. You're dealing right at the top of the organization, and the questions they ask and the things that we can raise with them, I think, are hugely beneficial. So I think in that sense, the World Economic Forum and Davos is very important for South Africa. One of the areas that, just following on from the power questions, had a number of meetings with people really interested in the whole field of renewable energy. Clearly, that is seen as a massive opportunity going forward for any multinational in that field. And then just to add on to what Minister Pandor said about the UK-Africa Summit in London on Monday, that again, it was very important, and we were well represented there. It's important to remember that if you look at the fixed investment that is on the ground in South Africa, the stock of fixed investment that's on the ground, roughly 40% of all foreign fixed investment in South Africa emanates from the UK, because given the history, and so therefore staying close to those companies and helping them expand and develop is critical. And I guess what it did highlight is that we're in competition with a lot of other African countries. It was an African summit, and we've got to up our game.
Thank you. There was another question, the third one.
Good morning, Sridhar with Bloomberg News. On South African Airways, when will the 2 billion rand payment be made? Where will the money come from? And just a quick second part, if the airways had to be liquidated, has the government analyzed how much money the Treasury will have to come up with to settle the guaranteed loans?
Thank you very much. As it turns out, nobody asked me that question during the Davos meetings. You are the first one to ask me that question. Would you like to discuss that after this? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, there we go. I'm Audrey Senekal from Business Report. In a meeting yesterday, in a session was about the dominance of the dollar, the Minister of Finance from Brasilia predicted that there is only 6 currencies in the next 2 decades. So my obvious question is, do you see a single currency for Africa? So that is the one question. And then my favorite topic, how do you see the future of rating agencies in the next decade? Thank you.
Well, there's Governor number 10, of the South African Reserve Bank. I'm Governor number 8, so I'll hand over that question to Governor number 10.
Thank you very much. It's difficult to predict what would happen to currencies going forward. Continentally, our leadership had committed to having a common central bank and a common currency going forward. It's going to be having to be preceded by a number of steps, just learning from what had happened in Europe, that you're going to need some form of a banking union. You're going to need a macroeconomic convergence program. And what we had established at a central bank is that there are at least 3 convergence programs that were taking place on the continent. SADC has got its own macroeconomic convergence program. East Africa had, and West Africa also had a different convergence program. At our meeting in Kigali last year, the central banks then reconciled the various convergence programs and tried to come with a continental convergence program. Until that you have that convergence program, you cannot think that you will make significant progress with the creation of a single currency. But there are also other aspects that people would have to take into account. The euro, which was the most advanced form of monetary integration, was a political project. And the African one will also be a political project. And our tasks as central bankers is to do the underlying technical work. Sometimes, and we are central bankers, we throw numbers at everything. It might not be politically palatable, but we have to put the numbers on the table and underpin the work that the political leadership of the continent has actually set for the continent.
So you see, for example, what he's saying is that for a currency to operate in many countries, your inflation rates need to be more or less the same levels. Your budget deficits before borrowing need to be the same level. The Europeans manage this through the Maastricht Treaty. Your balance of payments positions must be moving in the same direction so that you have this, what he calls macroeconomic convergence factors moving together within the monetary union. Very, very important. And he is part of the Association of African Central Bank Governors. They have a club, which I miss very much. It's a special club. You don't find it anywhere else, where the governors get together and debate these issues and following on the political decisions that have been made.
You also need your economy should have a strong base, because yes, a number of countries that become part of that common pool may not have the economic wherewithal to participate. So you need support measures. When smaller countries came into the euro, they had to have their economy strongly supported by countries such as Germany, France, and so on. So without that bulwark, that support, it's very difficult to actually achieve the level of convergence that's being referred to.
Just before I go and meet the other central banks, to say that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is going to require that trade be settled. And for you to settle trade, money must be able to move across the continent. In SADC, we have got a regional payment system that covers now 14 out of the 15 SADC member countries. It has now cleared in excess of 10 trillion rand since its inception. There are 2 other regional platforms in East Africa and in West Africa. SADC accounts for 80% of the cross-border settlements that are actually taking place across Southern Africa, East Africa, and West Africa. And what we have been doing as central banks was to then focus on the interoperability of the 3 regional payment systems, so that if you are a trader in East Africa and you are selling something in West Africa or in Southern Africa, you go through a common payment platform, and that should actually speed the settlement of trade.
Well, you said something about rating agencies. We have a love-hate relationship with the ratings agencies. We, for example, enter into contracts with them to do the ratings for us. We sometimes love each other, and at times we fight. But fact of the matter is that if you want to issue bonds internationally, you have to have a ratings by the ratings agencies, because that is not boycotting, it's attending to the other governors' meetings. The ratings agencies are critical in allowing institutional investors and others to invest in your bonds, and they need the guidance of ratings agencies. So whether you like them or not, they are an intrinsic part of the global financial system, of the global investment community, and they're actually helpful from time to time. I must say, as Minister of Finance, sometimes I like them because they help me in my conversations with my colleagues.
I won't respond.
Thank you very much, Minister. I will also want to formally excuse the Governor. He has to attend another meeting. May I please take that question?
Good day. My name is Naledi from the SABC. My question is about the structural reforms that have been proposed by government, which are said to, be the key to driving growth, the kind of growth that we want to see. It seems government and business, as well as the Reserve Bank governor, are all in agreement that these reforms are key to, driving the kind of growth that we want. However, you, Minister, have also said that there's inertia. There seems to be a delay in implementing these reforms. Why is there that delay, and whose responsibility is it? Who do you need to call to make sure that there's implementation in this regard? My question is also about we've seen a social media outrage regarding a prominent South African businessman, Pretis Motsepe, talking to U.S. President Donald Trump and telling him that South Africa loves him. In fact, Africa loves him and loves the United States. And first we want to know, is he in a position to represent Africa in that regard and speak on behalf of the continent? And I think the outrage is mostly because of the assertions that we've heard from U.S. President Donald Trump in the past, where he said some unsavory things about Africa. And, we want to know what is government's view and your view in this regard.
Well, structural reforms are very critical to giving an impetus to the growth process in South Africa. And as such, we'll continue to push for these structural reforms to take place. And we have unanimity within the cabinet that we need to push structural reforms. There is support from the business community for structural reforms. There's a need for a long conversation with the trade union movement in South Africa about structural reforms. There are some areas where they do not agree, and therefore conversations have to be had with the trades union movement to debate and discuss some of the structural issues, whether they are around collective bargaining matters and so on. These are critical structural issues that we have to discuss. Let me give an example of a delay. Government has long decided, for example, on the release of the spectrum, something that should have been done a year or two ago. Now it has been caught up in legal and procedural issues. Meanwhile, we're losing time in terms of migrating to 5G, whatever it is. And others are already talking about going China going to 6G. So we have to move. It's a key structural issue for hashtag data must fall, for example. Key for move of information, of communication. Business and economics thrive through communication. So that's key. So that's one of the issues of in Asia, for example, I could talk about. The issue of fixing the harbors and ports. We can't talk forever about fixing whether it's Richards Bay or Durban or Port Elizabeth. We need to move to unlock the movement of goods and so on. So some of the structural issues. You have to sort out, for example, the relationship between Transnet and PRASA. One entity owns the rail, the other has the stock. I mean, you have to rationalize everything and have a single railways policy and so on. So we're moving on those issues. Structural reforms don't take place in 1 month or in 2 months. They're a process. And so in the sequencing of policy, we have said the immediate short-term issues that must be handled are, for example, transport and communications, right? The importance of going to the world and grabbing the know-how. Skills are available around the world, and you must just go and grab them. Don't be jingoistic in your approach. Go out and get the skills from wherever they are, as long as they're going to help in the process of transformation. So, tourism, the minister mentioned tourism. There are many issues around tourism that we have to sort out, and we're looking to that, whether it's about visas, whether it's about structures like facilities and transport and safety and so on. But I can tell you the train is moving, and it's quite encouraging. Now, you mentioned something about a prominent South African business person who might have said something somewhere. I think that as a private individual, people are free to express their views. And as South Africans, we are a democratic society. We don't determine for people to say whatever they want to say. It's a democratic dispensation, and I think he was well within his rights to express his views. And he was very clear he was not speaking on behalf of the South African government. He doesn't have that kind of arrogance to speak on behalf of the South African government. And he was in a private meeting, and they were having private conversations. And I think that it's perfectly within his own right. And people must just leave him alone, you know.
Thank you, Minister. There is a question here. This side. Please get the mic. White jersey.
White jersey.
Linda van Tilburg, News. I'm probably going a little bit off piste here, but the talk in the corridors were a lot about the big tech companies and taxing them. Does that ever feature in South African government thinking? Because with your small tax base, you need to expand that.
Anything that can give me revenue, bring it on. I will not shy away from anything that will bring revenue, but the tax policy is a very complex matter, and I really do not propose to talk about tax policy here. We'll discuss tax policy in February. But all I know is taxation has to be efficient, effective, and fair, not punitive.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, sir.
Devin Murrigan from ENCA. Minister, we're often told that sentiment and confidence is the cheapest form of stimulus in the economy. And we know that the government is making a lot of efforts to try and ramp that up with the business community. We've seen what's happening here in Davos, a campaign to install confidence. But when you look at the surveys, you look at the business confidence surveys, it's down at 30-year lows. The PwC has released a CEO confidence index a few days ago, also hovering, I think, at its lowest level since 2010. Why is there a gap between how CEOs are feeling and how businesses are feeling, despite the efforts for government to do this? It's been a long, long time. That's the first question. I also have an SAA question, Minister. I was wondering if you could do the same with me?
Later, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, if I have a crack at the business confidence one, as a former CEO myself, I think the challenge is that CEOs are living in the today, and what are they feeling today? They're feeling low growth. They're reading about jobs being shed in the economy and things of that sort, which clearly doesn't make you feel good today. The real thing is kind of leadership and the future and shaping the future, and that requires long-term thinking, planning investments, which typically in business, take you out a few years. And so I think today's business confidence isn't necessarily indicative of what's likely to transpire in the future, but it also, I think, talks to the fact that perhaps there was, if you go back a year or so, there was over-optimism. Now we're in a sort of a phase of realism, and I guess many business people are saying, let's see the action as opposed to talk about what we should be doing. So it's a mixture of all of those things. But I must say, as I think most business leaders, as they're planning for their businesses, take a 4 or 5 year view, are not really that affected by today's business confidence.
Sorry, Minister. Can I ask a question to my colleague? How many business CEOs actually fill in that form themselves? Or is the form actually filled in by some assistant somewhere? Do they actually fill in the form?
Well, I think it would be very, very much company by company. I know I certainly used to do those things because, it is important, but there's a big risk, I think, that often those are delegated down to lower levels in the organisation.
Yes. I wanted to say that I think the issue of confidence is not solely a domestic matter. In the discussions in Davos, one of the issues that kept coming up was the uncertainty caused in the business sector by the current trade issues between the USA and China. And this was common across all regions of the world. All countries, all businesses feel that there is an impact of this impasse, that even the notion of a phase 1 agreement and no sense of what phase 2 might mean and when it would come about gives a sense of unease. So while indeed there are concerns about South Africa and the need for us to grow, we are one of the countries that is very, very connected in business terms to the global business community. And thus that unease would also impact on us.
Thank you, Minister. There is a question.
Hilary Jaffe from Business Times. This is a question mainly to yourself, Chair. May I ask about South Africa's presence this year at Davos? I know we've had fewer than usual. There seem to have been fewer CEOs. Brand SA has not taken over the Kirchner Museum as it has done in previous years. I absolutely understand the need for austerity, and I think we can all support that. But it did seem to some people that we had really not flown the flag fantastically well. And, for example, that the event the other evening at the Intercontinental was really, in fact, poorly attended, if attended at all, by anyone who wasn't a South African. So my question is, why has South Africa's presence at the WEF this year been so muted? Would you, as Brand South Africa, be open to partnering with some of the companies who attend Davos, the banks particularly, who have a lot of experience in organizing these kinds of events, outings to investors and others? Would you be open to partnering with them in future years to, as it were, put on a better show at, I hope, no more cost to the fiscus?
Well, let me deal with that. I'm very pleased that you say that when the delegation is led by me, it's very muted and low level effect. I'm very pleased that you have said that. And I will forever remember and stay in my lane in that regard. Nevertheless, it's quite correct that 3 ministers were sent here by the President together with the investment envoy and the governor of the South African Reserve Bank. In a sense, you could say that's the official delegation. But the South African delegation is not that small, actually, because we have a significant number of business leaders here from South Africa, so it's quite significant. Maybe not as large as it used to be before. When the times are hard, you also must reevaluate, your delegations and so on. But the fact that we're present here is significant. My observation, actually, about the reception that we held at the Intercontinental was that it's a cross membership, South African and other non-South Africans who were there, and I thought it was quite nice, actually. It's different and quite classy, actually. I'm sorry that we couldn't offer you a three-course meal, but I thought it was proper and pitched at the correct level, and I think we did very well there. The number of meetings we've been able to hold, in my view, are sufficient and managed to communicate the South African message quite effectively. The business leadership in various places. So I'm actually pleased about our performance. Remember, quantity does not always mean quality. And I think we brought the sharpest quality to Davos this year.
Thank you, Minister.
Although I do think we can have a better function. But anyway.
Yeah.
It's Diabo Sito again. Just last three questions from me. Mr. Murray, in your engagements during this week, did you get a sense that when we have the investment conference later this year, I'm hoping that it is an annual event, that we'll probably see more investment being pledged from maybe multinational companies and maybe ones that are directed towards entrepreneurs and small businesses back home in South Africa. Minister, the social mobility report was released, which ranks South Africa at number 77. I'm wondering about what your thoughts are about what it pegged, the issues of education and how we can solve those. Minister Pandor, I was wondering if you had any discussions with the U.S. with regards to the copyright law that threatens, to spill out more than 30 billion in trade revenue in the country. I know that there's a meeting that will be held on the 30th of January with in Washington. Have you had any, corridor talks or meetings at all of a formal nature about that? Thank you.
Just on the question of the investment conference, we've had, as you know, we've had two, and certainly, as I understand, we have another one at the same time. Whenever we talk to foreign investors, it's a standard sort of item on the agenda to say, are you thinking or would you consider coming to the conference at the end of the year? But of course, we're interested in investment, and whether people are coming to the conference or not is not so much the issue. It's are they going to invest that we talk to them about. But as you know, the conferences have been very successful. We're on track to the target that's been set by the president, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to deliver something similar again at this year. In terms of investments and supporting smaller businesses and so on, that is not really the focus at these meetings, because you can't really expect big multinationals to be focusing on that. But whenever investments are made, there are always, obviously, the issues of South Africa and the extent to which, companies investing in the country comply with localization, triple BE requirements, etc., all of which lead to opportunities for smaller companies. But the focus here is talking to the really big companies.
Thank you very much. Minister is adding. Yes, Minister.
We didn't answer Ms. Joffe's question about partnering with business. I remember at the function, Ms. Manzini did. And so probably next year will be better.
All right, Tapiri, we lost the feeds. Very interesting stuff coming out from Davos, Switzerland, as Team South Africa wrapping up their stint there at the World Economic Forum. It's the 50th World Economic Forum in Davos.